Broadcasting now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Probing New Public Opinion Data for an Informed Response. This is the fourth in a series of Zoom forums where we at MassINC and the MassINC Polling Group examine COVID-19 public opinion research on distinct policy areas and explore potential policies that address the impacts of the pandemic. Last time, we looked into data on how the crisis impacted college plans for families of 10th, 11th, 12th graders across the state. Thank you to those who were present then, and thank you to those who are joining us now. I'd also like to thank Housing and Economic Development Secretary Michael Keneally and Dominic Ayano of MassMutual and board member of MassINC for being here with us today. As you can tell, today we have a full program and look forward to an informative discussion with you all on what small businesses and businesses owned by women and people of color have undergone and continue to face in light of the pandemic. We all know that small businesses are the bloodlines of our communities. They provide meaningful employment, services, and foster our local economies. As such, we hope that the findings of this poll help inform both our short-term and long-term policy solutions. As you're listening, like always, please be sure to make use of the chat function and share your questions as they arise. They may either get answered in the chat by MassINC Polling Research Director Rich Parr, or they may be answered by our speakers during our question and answer portion at the end. Before we jump in with the presentation, I first want to extend a huge and profound thank you to the sponsors and distributors of the poll. This was an expansive coalition led by Amplify Latinx and the Lawrence Partnership of small business economic development partners who engaged the largest network of partners I have seen to date. It was great to see firsthand the inclusivity and intentionality that was put behind this initiative amongst all the partners. Thank you to MassMutual, Amplify Latinx, the Lawrence Partnership, Eastern Bank, the Himes Foundation, Massachusetts Growth Capital Corporation, Foundation for Business Equity, Center for Women in Enterprise, E4All, the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, Initiative for a Competitive Inner City, Essex County Community Foundation, Boston Impact Initiative, LISC Boston, MACDC, and Mass Development. Without your support and relentless ongoing work, this poll could not have been possible, so we thank you. And now, we're going to dive right into the rich results of the poll with a presentation led by Steve Koczela, president of the MassINC Polling Group. Steve, take it away for us.
Thank you, Juana, and thank you all so much for joining us this morning. As Juana said, this was a full group effort with many sponsors and many partners helping to make this poll a reality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen now and take you through some slides that go over some of the highlights of what this poll showed, how it was done, and some of the things that our small businesses here in Massachusetts are facing right now in this very, very unique time that we're living through. So I'm not going to read the full list again, but I am just going to again offer thanks to the sponsors that are shown here on the first slide. The other group that should be shouted out is the groups that distributed the survey, and those are all shown here at the bottom of the second slide. This was a very large group effort to get the survey out to a group of small businesses all across the state and in all parts of the small business community. So what is this survey that we're talking about today? This is a survey of 1,868 small business leaders here in Massachusetts. The survey was conducted from late June through mid-July and was done online, distributed through the business associations, community organizations, and so forth that were shown on the slide that we just looked at. We then weighted the data to reflect the gender and race and ethnicity data for company ownership using SBA and census data. We did that specifically because we conducted oversamples as a part of the survey to be sure that we were able to look at what the impact had been on businesses owned by women and businesses owned by people of color. So after the survey was over, we then weighted the data to be sure that it was fully representative of the state's small business community. So in terms of key findings, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these because we have data on each one of these, but just to give you a sense of what we're going to be looking at. The first thing that kind of jumped right out is that only about a third of small businesses right now say that they're fully open. The rest say that they're somewhere on the spectrum between partially open, completely closed, and not planning to reopen. One of the things that we found makes a big difference, there's actually two things. One of them is business size, with the smallest businesses suffering, as we'll see in a number of different ways, the most serious impacts of the pandemic and the economic issues that it's brought on. And the other one is sector, business sector. Basically, if you're in a business that requires customers to come into your shop, open the door and interact with your customers, you've had a much harder go of it. And we'll see that also, that shows up in a number of different dimensions. In terms of PPP loans, which is an issue we've seen discussed a lot in the news, a lot of businesses were helped. I mean, we've seen the data from the SBA and the census that 70+% have applied or received PPP loans, and 70+% of small business payroll was supported by PPP loans. But as we'll see, it was not universally helpful to businesses in all situations throughout the Commonwealth. In terms of moving ahead, the top challenge that businesses cited in terms of getting workers back was competing with unemployment benefits, essentially. This was among businesses that said that they've had difficulty getting employees back. Many businesses haven't even tried yet, but among those who have, the first thing was unemployment, then fear of infection, and then the third thing was childcare, which we'll see again a little bit later. Looking ahead, the thing that businesses said that they need the most, I think probably to no one's surprise on this call, is just cash. They need money, they need grants, they need loans, they need new sources of revenue. But beyond that, there's some really interesting variation in terms of the size of the business and the nature of the business in terms of the things that they say that they need. And we'll get into the details of what that looks like in a little bit. And then the thing that we just see come up over and over again is the smallest businesses, the micro businesses, have very specific sets of challenges. And those challenges are compounded by the fact that they don't have the same kinds of safeguards and kind of formalities that some of the larger businesses have, like business banking, like a formal insurance relationship and so forth. So that's a quick tour of the key findings. I know it was fast, but we've got so much data to get through. I want to kind of keep us moving. Please do send questions, and these slides will be posted on our website at massincpolling.com. If they're not there already, they will be soon. So all this data will be there if you want to go through it at a slower pace a little bit later. So this first chart, what it shows is whether or not businesses are closed, which is the dark blue part of the bar, open in a limited way, which is the middle section there, or completely open. And this is the first time we see that how business size impacts things. And if you kind of look all the way over at the right of this chart, you see that among your $5 million plus businesses, this is 2019 revenue we're looking at, you've got more than half that say that they're completely open and operating, basically completely open and doing business. And almost all of the rest of them say that they're open in a limited way. Then as you kind of scan over to the left and you get down to your smaller businesses, your sub 1 million, your sub 100,000, down to your truly micro businesses, you see that the number who say that they're fully open kind of tends to shrink, and the number who says that they're closed tends to grow. And this again is just the first time we're going to see the difference between business size and how it's playing out at this particular moment in the challenges that the pandemic has brought on. So that we said there's basically two things, size and sector. We just looked at size. Now this chart looks at exactly the same thing, but by sector. And you can see here too that there's huge differences in the likelihood of you saying that you're completely open or even partly open, depending on what sector it is that your business operates in. So looking all the way out at the right, you've got manufacturing and construction, who are the two most likely to say that their businesses are completely open. Then you look over to the left, and you've got education, which, just a quick note on that, that's not schools, that's things like sports camps, it's things like daycares, it's enrichment activity organizations and so forth. But think, things that need to bring children through the doors in order to operate. And you've also got beauty businesses there and restaurants, and we're going to see those come up over and over again as well. So one of the things the reasons that we keep coming back to size, in addition to just the fact that it's one of the sources of the biggest variation in outcomes and experience, is that it also is very closely related to inequities in the small business world before, and very much the small business world where we're headed now. So what this chart shows is basically the breakdown of business size, depending on whether one or more of the owners or founders if you had a woman-owned founder, or I'm sorry, if you had a woman-owned business, if you had a minority-owned business, if the business was owned by a woman of color, and then the bars basically show the breakdown of business size, again, using 2019 revenue. And what you can see is that if you're talking about the impacts to the smallest businesses, those are disproportionately likely to hit women-owned businesses and businesses owned by people of color. So that's one of the things to kind of keep in your mind as we go through the rest of the presentation. And we see over and over again that some of the smallest businesses are really experiencing the worst of the pandemic's impacts on business. Is that this dynamic, it goes hand in hand with business size, and it's just kind of something to keep in mind, both in terms of where we've been and very much where we're going. So how big has the impact really been? Well, there's a lot of ways to measure it, but what this one looks at is the percent of businesses who said that they lost half their revenue in 2020 compared to 2019. So did you see your revenue just fall off a cliff, basically? And the very top bar, 44% of the small businesses that we talked to said, yes, I lost half my revenue or more in the first half of 2020. But then I picked a couple interesting groupings here because it again shows that the impacts are very different depending on your sector and depending on your size, and then again depending on the demographics of the business owners. So the first thing again is that the question of whether or not you have customers coming on the premises is just a very key dynamic to understanding the entirety of how the pandemic is affecting small businesses. So 52% of businesses that have customers on the premises say they lost half their revenue in the first half of the year, compared to 33% of all others. Now I should pause there and just say 33% is still a huge number. I don't mean to minimize it in any way. And that's another thing as we're going through this, that we're looking at differences and we're looking at which businesses have had the biggest impacts, but all of the impacts on this chart are big. All of them under normal times would be ones that would generate headlines in their own policy responses and their own reactions. So I'm not trying to minimize them. I just want to point out where some small businesses have had it even worse than the already serious problems that others are describing. So then the other set of bars there, we look at the smallest micro businesses under $100,000, and we see 55% of them have lost half their revenue. Then going down to the $500,000 plus businesses there, you've only got 35% who say the same. Again, a big number, but not as big. Then looking between women-owned businesses and businesses owned by men, you can also see there that there's a disparity there. And businesses owned by women of color, 54% of them say that they lost at least half their revenue in the first half of 2020. So again, turning back to sector then, the numbers on this chart are the same ones we were just looking at. Did you lose half your revenue in the first half of 2020? And we see that the difference by sector is just so significant. We saw already that the question of customers on premises made a big difference, but then looking specifically at sectors, 70% of beauty businesses said that they lost half their revenue, 67% of restaurants and bars. Healthcare is one that deserves its own presentation in a lot of ways, just because the dynamics there are so specific. Retail also, 50% said that they lost at least half their revenue. So thinking then about if you kind of take beauty, restaurant and bar and retail, the thing that struck me throughout this, looking at this data, is how much of all of our main streets are made up by those businesses. This is main streets all across Massachusetts, whatever your community is. You've got restaurants, you've got retail, you've got barbershops, you've got beauty salons, nail salons, et cetera. Pizza shops, whatever it is. These are the ones that are the storefronts, the people that make up city and town business communities all across Massachusetts. So to see them be the hardest hit, I think, is just very sobering in terms of the future that it portends for main streets across Massachusetts if the direction that this poll data suggests is the one that we end up taking. So what about getting workers back to work? The question here was basically, have you had trouble? Have you had difficulty getting furloughed employees to come back to work? And we found that the largest business, overall 29% said yes, they've had trouble getting furloughed employees to come back to work. And I should mention, it's not shown here, but it's about, I believe the number's about half said that they had laid off or furloughed employees. And again, that varies very significantly by sector. But the interesting thing is that the largest businesses are the ones that say that they're having the most trouble getting workers to come back. And again, it's the businesses that say that they're bringing customers into the store and onto their premises are also describing greater differences, or difficulties rather. So why is that? What are the reasons for that? We've kind of seen some described in the news, and we have kind of anecdotal accounts, but for any business who said that they did have trouble getting their employees to come back, we asked the follow-up question. What is the reason that or the source of the difficulty in getting employees to return to work? The number one thing was making more money from unemployment than at work. 2/3 of the businesses that said that they had issues getting workers to come back cited that as a reason. You could select more than one here, which is why this chart adds up to more than 100%. And then the number two reasons were the fear of being infected and number 2 and 3 rather, were fear of being infected and the lack of childcare or school for kids at home. That's certainly something which just in the next number of weeks, I think we'll see. We have a lot. There's a lot up in the air about what a significant barrier that remains, kind of in the months ahead. But there was also some variation by company size that I thought was quite interesting. So basically, when you break out these reasons, it matters how big of a company we're talking about. So the bars are a breakout of businesses, again, of different sizes based on your 2019 revenue, with your dark sort of brownish, reddish bars there, your under 100,000 micro businesses, the red bars being 100 to 500,000, and then the pink being over 500. And you can see that it's your largest businesses that say making more money from unemployment than at work was one of the major challenges. I think there's some really interesting reasons for that that I think Tracy's going to get into in a little bit more detail. But just some things to kind of think about is who are the employees that each of these types of businesses would have and what kinds of jobs are they doing? And I think that's just a little preview of some of the detail that I think she's going to get into. So then the question is, well, looking ahead, what are the kinds of impacts that we could potentially expect? And one of the ways that we can figure that out is what bills are people falling behind on, and how common is it that businesses are falling behind on their bills? Who's going to be in trouble with taxes? Who's going to be in trouble with rent, vendor bills, utility bills, et cetera? Insurance, of course, because that's going to be a key issue in reopening. And you can see that most businesses, 64%, said none of them. I've not fallen behind on any of the bills. But the most common ones, the bills that have been left on the desk, so to speak, were rent and vendor bills were the two. And we're going to see in just a second that, again, there's just very big differences by sector that I think that highlight, again, this threat to Main Street businesses, just in terms of who's had the most trouble keeping current on their bills. So this then looks at the same question, whether you've fallen behind on any payment, any of the payments we looked at in the previous slide, and then that's the red bars. And then the pink bars are whether you've fallen behind specifically on rent. And we're breaking it out here by sector with all the sectors we've been looking at, and whether or not businesses in those, what percentage of businesses in those sectors say that they've fallen behind on any payment, and then rent specifically. And we see a familiar set of things there at the left. We see beauty businesses were the most likely to say that they've fallen behind on both, followed by restaurants and bars, followed by retail. Again, that's sort of that Main Street trifecta of businesses that are the most likely to say that they've fallen behind on bills in general, and the most likely to say that they've fallen behind on rent. So certainly something to consider just in terms of its potential impact, both on the vitality of commercial districts in cities and towns, also something to think about in terms of commercial properties and the overall picture in terms of evictions that that we've been talking about, we've hearing about in the news. We've, I think, heard more about the potential impact on residential properties, but certainly this is something to consider as well, as what the impact would be potentially on main streets and commercial buildings all over the state if these dynamics were to persist. Another way that missed payments vary is both by demographics and geography. So again, looking at the potential inequities that the pandemic creates in terms of its impact on small business, we see businesses that are owned by people of color are more likely to say that they've fallen behind on any of the bills that we asked about. So, you know, again, something there closely related to both size and sector, I think. We also see that there's variation by geography, with businesses closer into Boston much more likely to say that they have fallen behind on some of these bills. You know, your higher cost properties, where places where rent is higher and where other bills may be higher, these are the businesses that are most likely to describe some level of distress when it comes to keeping up with their bills. So then we took a look at the Paycheck Protection Program, of course, the federal loan program, which could potentially be converted into a grant if you used your money in certain ways. And we asked a couple questions about it. The first was just whether you participated at all, whether you applied, and found that over 70% said that they did. So right in line with about what the Census Bureau found in their surveys of small businesses. But there were big differences in terms of the size of the business and whether or not you said that your business had participated in the PPP program. With the largest businesses, those over 250, basically, the very large majority of larger businesses, even over 100,000, said that they had participated. Whereas when you get down into your smallest micro businesses, they were much less likely to say that they had. There's some potential reasons for that. You know, there's other benefits that small individual proprietors could potentially have had access to that may have made PPP not the best thing for them to do as an individual. But it does, I think, just illustrate what the impact that this policy had and where specifically in the small business community the PPP impact was greatest. Which again tended to be businesses that already had more revenue in previous years and also had larger payrolls. So we also then looked at whether or not you had been approved for the loan, that the size of loan you'd applied for, approved for a smaller amount, which is the lighter blue bar there, denied altogether, or you didn't know, which is the gray parts of the bar up there at the top. And you can see that the smallest businesses were the least likely to say that they've been approved already for the full amount. And as you kind of look across the chart, looking into progressively larger and larger revenue categories, you can see that more and more, and until you're almost basically all, had been approved for the full amount or approved for a smaller amount. So again, there's different reasons that smaller businesses might have chosen not to apply, but certainly there were differences in terms of outcome with the very smallest micro businesses that did choose to apply, less likely to say that they'd been approved for a full amount. There's some, I think, interesting dynamics to consider as to why this might be. We'll see in a little bit the differences in banking relationships, for instance, whether micro businesses have a business banking relationship is one thing that could potentially be impacting this. You know, whether you have things like an accounting department, you've got financial expertise, you have, you know, other kinds of people on staff who might be able to steer you through the PPP process. I think it's reasonable to think that all of these things probably had some impact on whether or not you applied and whether or not you were, what the outcome was when you applied. We also then looked at it, broke it down by businesses that were owned by people of color to see if there were different outcomes between white-owned businesses and businesses owned by people of color. And we found that there were some differences, both in terms of the frequency of application, which is what we're looking at here, the percent who said that they applied for a PPP loan. And then also the outcome, which we'll see in just a second. This is also closely related, of course, to business size, going back to the slide that we looked at the very beginning. But I think just further, it's something to consider as far as when we're thinking about what the impacts of policies have been overall, and whether, and just who the PPP loan has benefited. So, Looking then at the question of outcome, that we then did basically the same thing we did by business size, just to compare white-owned businesses with businesses owned by people of color or founded by people of color, and found here too there's differences in terms of the outcome. If you did submit an application for a PPP loan, which again, white-owned businesses were somewhat more likely to do, there were also differences in terms of outcome. I think some of these, again, are related to size, and there's been lots of media coverage also just of the way that PPP was designed and some of the differential impacts that potentially created. One of them, of course, is the relationship between the business and whether they have a business banking relationship. The dark red bars here are the percent who said that they do not have a business banking relationship. And you can see that the smallest micro businesses are much more likely to say that they don't have a business banking relationship, which of course then also poses problems for PPP, since that was one of the key ways that it was administered, particularly at the beginning when some banks were even requiring that you already have a lending relationship, not even just a, depository account or something like that. So certainly something that I think impacted the way that PPP sort of rolled through the small business community. And then the light pink bars there are people who said that their business didn't have insurance, which of course is key to reopening. And we'll see here in a second how that translates into confidence and the impact that confidence in your liability insurance plays in reopening. So that's actually what we're looking at here, which is the percent in each sector and by each size that said that they're very or somewhat confident that their liability insurance is sufficient to reopen. So you see construction up there, 90% say yes. And we remember from earlier back in the presentation, the majority of construction businesses are fully reopened, or almost all of them are at least partly reopened. But then you look down at the bottom bars in that first set, and you see a familiar set. Again, you see retail. Again, you see restaurants. Again, you see beauty businesses. Also the education businesses that we outlined a little bit earlier. But it's the businesses that either have customers coming on the premises, or in the case of education businesses, both customers, both adults and children coming on the premises. These are the ones that are the least certain as to whether or not their liability insurance is sufficient. Then you look down at company size, and you also see the same dynamic with where the smallest business is the least likely to be confident that even if they have insurance, this is just among businesses that have insurance, that they had enough insurance to reopen successfully. So then the other thing that we wanted to explore with this poll is what kind of assistance do businesses think that they need to reopen? And we asked about a whole bunch of different things, which are shown here on the slide. And the percentages in the table are those who say that each type of assistance shown here would be, quote, very useful. And the top two, I think, to nobody's surprise, are money. It's grant funding, it's revenue sources. Those are the top two by quite some distance. But then there's an interesting breakout further with kind of the next batch. The PPP loan forgiveness process is in there. And then you've got a set of online stuff, basically digital marketing, social media, selling online. Loans is also in there. But the interesting thing is that breaks out by company size in an interesting way, because if you think back to what we just looked at for PPP, a lot of the smallest businesses don't need help with PPP loan forgiveness because they didn't get a PPP loan in the first place. So we broke it out that way and found that businesses under 100,000, 29% of them said that help with PPP loan forgiveness would be very useful, whereas about half of the larger businesses said that would be very useful. That's something to take note of on its own, that half of businesses are kind of looking out at that PPP forgiveness and thinking that some kind of assistance working through that system would be very useful. That's certainly something that I think we have coming toward us that's worth considering. But then look at the direction of the other three sets of bars. There you see that the smallest businesses need more help with digital marketing, more help with social media, more help with selling online. These are the businesses which I think we can reasonably infer are less likely to have social media departments, associates, managers, fancy IT consultants and so forth. So the thing that they need is to adapt to the new, basically to the current situation. A lot of these businesses I think we can also expect that they don't have advanced e-commerce platforms. They've never really had to sell online. They're a small takeout place or a eat-in place of some kind. They're, mom and pop kind of barbershop or nail salon or something like that, where e-commerce isn't really something that's ever pertained before. So just something to think about in terms of what kinds of help businesses of different sizes need. This has a lot of data on it. I promise I'm not going to read every single percentage on here, but I would encourage you, if you want to kind of get a sense of what each sector says they need, to go to our website at massincpolling.com, download the slides and take a look here. If you're working with one of these sectors, there's very specific things that each one of the businesses needs. So just for example, beauty businesses about halfway down are more likely than any other type of business to say that they need help complying with reopening rules and regulations on safety. That's the kind of thing where it's not going to be particularly pertinent to manufacturing businesses, for instance, but it is very pertinent to beauty businesses. So if one of these particular sectors is something that you're working with or something that's on your mind, this chart will really give you a good sense of what it is that they need. And then just one more thing that we looked at. There are many more things, but in the interest of time, we're just going to look at one more. What this one looks at is the help that cities and towns have given with those rules and regulations that we just talked about in the previous slide. Basically, have they been helpful, the percents that you see in the dark red bars, and have they been helpful in helping you deal with them? Local government's been helpful in helping you deal with them. And we can see that by and large, half or more say yes. There is that leaves a lot of people out. So I'd say that there's mixed views on this, but we do also see a bit of a geographic trend with businesses closer into Boston thinking that their local governments have been helpful in terms of the regulations and also helping navigate them. So that is a very quick tour through the results of the poll. Again, the poll is posted over at massincpolling.com. But to continue and I can see from the chat that a lot of people have submitted questions, but to continue our conversation, we'll put off those questions to the end of the forum. For now, it's my pleasure to introduce Dominic Iano, a MassINC board member and head of state government relations at MassMutual, who is one of the generous lead sponsors of the poll. So Dominic, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. Can you hear me okay? All right, Zoom works. Great. Thank you, everybody. I get the honor of introducing Secretary Keneally, but first I just want to say a thank you to MassINC. I am a board member of MassINC, and I've been for a couple of years now, but I'm also a longtime supporter and fan. When I was a young professional, I was attending programs on civic engagement and home ownership, and here I am now working for a company headquartered in one of the gateway cities, which you serve and benefit with all your research and advocacy. So I thank you on behalf of myself and MassMutual, company headquartered in Springfield with 4,500 employees, and have been there since 1851. I'm proud to be a Massachusetts company. Many of those employees are virtual these days. We have some presence in Boston now, but we are a Springfield company, and have a leader, Roger Crandall, who supports this type of research and solutions and helping both with the economic recovery and some of the racial equity issues that we've seen lately in the news, and we just want to be a part of the solution. So thank you to MassINC. You guys are great. Secretary Keneally has been Secretary of Housing and Economic Development since, I believe, January of 19. I had the privilege of working with Secretary Keneally in my time in the Baker administration when he was Assistant Secretary of that same agency. And he's at the forefront of economic opportunity and housing and providing business growth, and particularly these days serving in his role on the Reopening Advisory Board as a co-chair, certainly at the forefront of a lot of these issues we're talking about in this research today. This is an administration, I just have to say, they are always great at listening for new ideas and perspectives. They are really good, and I want to make some notes here so I can get this right, but they just don't pontificate and grandstand. Their view of the world is not the view, and everybody else figure it out. They work with everybody. They work with companies, they work with local officials, they work with community advocates, and especially legislators, because without them, of course, none of those others will get what they need. So they're so good at just getting results and working with the legislature to make sure that they get the policies right. It's also been great to work with them over the last few months, particularly during this pandemic. As a company based here, we've had so many issues we never would have foresaw with this pandemic, and they have been great working through regulatory challenges and other challenges that we never would have foreseen, like I said, and a particular shout out to your insurance commissioner who we work with closely, Gary Anderson. I mean, you guys just have been great to work with, and I know that you will take this research, absorb it. There's a lot of great information here, and I know that they will be working on a very results-oriented approach to incorporating this research and getting us on the right track. Thank you to everything you're doing. Thank you for being a leader in the country on this economic recovery. And with that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Keneally.
Well, Dominic, thank you for the very kind introduction. Hope folks can hear me okay. And really, thank you to you and Roger and the team at MassMutual for all you've done, really throughout your history of Massachusetts, but also during the pandemic. I mean, you're such an important employer, both here in Boston as well as in Western Mass, obviously. The way you've stepped up for frontline healthcare workers with an announcement around free life insurance early on in the pandemic. That's an incredibly inspiring announcement. Your donations to resiliency funds, the Boston Resiliency Fund and the Western Mass COVID-19 Response Fund, and the commitment to keep employees working from home is really incredibly important. It's a key part of our reopening strategy to try to limit the spread of the virus in the workplace, and having major employers step up and commit to do that is a real statement and a really important step forward for all of us. So thanks to you, MassMutual, for all you've done for the Commonwealth. And of course, a big thank you to MassINC for putting this event together, for the research and the results, which we will all study carefully. And all your partnership with us in so many other policy efforts, in your support and advocacy for the gateway cities and the folks who live and work there. You've been just a terrific partner for so many years in so many ways. And I was looking at the list of sponsors, and I think I could spend most of the morning thanking most of them for all they've done. So at the risk of not taking up too much time and excluding someone, I won't mention anyone by name, but that is an incredible list of partners who were valuable to us pre-pandemic and essential and life-saving to us now in the pandemic. And I really can't thank them enough for all that they've done. I thought I would spend a few minutes and talk about how we as an administration have approached the issue of support for small business during the pandemic, touch on the reopening strategy a little bit. And I do want to spend a couple minutes on our economic development bill, which is a core part of our economic recovery strategy. But I will say early on, knowing this would be a incredibly challenging time for small business, we thought establishing lines of communication were very important. And so we set up a standing weekly call with all the chambers of commerce and business associations around the state back in March. We continue to do that. And I feel it's been a very valuable session for folks to get updates from us on things we're doing and for us to hear what's happening on the ground in their communities. So communication has been key. Capital, of course, has been incredibly important. Our Mass Growth Capital Corporation stood up a emergency loan fund early on in the process, and we worked very actively with the Small Business Administration and our partners in the federal government to facilitate the implementation of the Paycheck Protection Program and other programs here. That's been a core part of the strategy. Tax relief for small businesses, we've also have been active in that regard. Working with our division of banks and our division of insurance to have them provide guidance to their customers, to encourage them to be lenient with both their corporate and personal clients. Those are some other measures we've taken. But we tried to get a lot of things done early on and put steps in place to provide some measure of relief during what's been obviously an incredibly challenging period of time. I'd also point to the community development block grants, which are issued, I believe it was last week, $20 million in CDBG money for 174 communities. And a lot of those communities are using that capital to support their small companies. And then finally, the COVID-19 Small Business Stabilization Network set up by the Mass Growth Capital Corporation and MHCDC. It's 50 partners around the state working with companies to support them with technical assistance. It's been inspiring to see that effort come together and the impact that's had. So that's a bit of a whirlwind tour to some of the steps we've taken to help small companies during the pandemic. With respect to reopening, I co-chair the Reopening Advisory Board with the Lieutenant Governor. We're now in phase 3 of our reopening. Our results have been pretty good so far. And I will say one of the most important things we can do for the long-term stability of our communities and our small businesses is to have a successful reopening. And the way to do that, we believe, is to go through a careful, phased, data-driven approach where we let the health indicators tell us when it's time to move on to future phases of reopening, and where we all can play a role in that. And if you look at our reopening strategy we issued on May 18th, one of the key concepts in there is shared responsibility. The fact that we all have a role to play here. The public, government, the healthcare system, employers, we all have safety protocols and standards we ought to follow. Employers have been terrific about that by and large. We work closely with our partners in local government as well. But if we all do the things we can do, it's our hope that we can move through this phase reopening successfully and get to what we're calling the new normal. But I applaud our business community for embracing the fact that they have to operate in a different way. And we spend a lot of time with industry, crafting industry-specific protocols and creating communications tools that businesses can use to communicate to their employees and customers and visitors how they're operating today. And I think the response to that has been terrific, and it needs to be. If we're going to get to where we want to be in terms of the virus numbers and getting to this new normal, it's essential we continue to operate that way. I do want to touch on our economic development bill and the broader economic recovery strategy. We are thinking about a comprehensive recovery strategy as we speak. I like Steve's use of the term Main Street, because as we think about where recovery needs to happen and the items on our list, thinking about our main streets is really critically important, and in particular support directly for our small businesses. So to go back in time a little bit, on March 4th, the governor filed an economic development bill. And obviously at the time, we didn't know that was 6 days before the declaration of a state of emergency and when life would change dramatically for all of us. But we spent a lot of time in 2019 crisscrossing the state developing a new economic development plan. And that led to the bill being filed in March. And we came up with new ways to support our communities, support our businesses, address our housing crisis. I'll touch on that. And as we got deeper now into the legislative session, and now that we're into reopening, we took a hard look at that bill. And we thought it was a good bill before, but we asked ourselves, how can we make the bill more responsive to the moment we're in now? And how can we address two themes in particular, equity and recovery? So those are the aims of the bill, as we've suggested that it be amended and altered to address those two themes. There's a lot in the bill, and I'll talk about the small business part in more detail, but support for the neighborhoods and communities that were hardest hit by COVID-19 is absolutely essential. We have money for neighborhood stabilization, both for commercial development and for housing development in our bill. Producing more housing in our gateway cities is also a critical aim of the bill. Producing more affordable housing generally across the state, and we have capital programs in the bill for that. Zoning reform, an effort the governor and I have been at now for quite some time to attempt to reform our zoning code and have it be that municipalities can approve rezonings by a simple majority, not a supermajority. We were using the term housing crisis long before we knew what COVID-19 was. We've been in a housing crisis in Massachusetts. It does indirectly, or actually rather directly, impact our small businesses and communities as well. So those are some of the aims of the bill. But we also asked ourselves, how can we help our small companies? And in an environment where we've been fortunate to have federal money come in to the tune of about $15 billion, we know there are gaps in that money. And we know that not all companies have been served by that capital. So we really tried to do in the bill is have a much more robust support through capital for small companies than we originally anticipated. And so what you see in the bill now is $50 million of support, a combination of $35 million in grants to our community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, who work directly with small companies in our communities, and then $15 million in micro grants for businesses. We initially thought we'd have $15 million in the bill for those items. Those items are now at $50 million. But I think that will be really essential capital for our small companies that in particular weren't served by the federal programs, and to get them back up and running and thriving in the future. It's July 23rd. The legislative session is slated to end on July 31st. So we're spending a lot of time now with our colleagues in the legislature. But I do think it's imperative now that we get an equity and recovery package over the finish line and go on and support our small companies. A couple words on the poll and the survey we just saw. That's really great data, and that will inform our view both of future programs, how we prioritize and run the programs we have now, and how we think about different ways to support our companies. So I'll leave it there. It's great to be with you all. What a great group of partners and colleagues, and congrats to MassINC, and thank you as well for this incredible work.
Thank you so very much, Secretary Keneally, for being here, for the tireless work you do on behalf of our Commonwealth and your invaluable insights. I'm now delighted to introduce our final speaker before we get to our answer and question session. So please, just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat function and we'll be sure to get to them by the end of the event. Dr. Tracy Corley leads MassINC's Transformative Transit-Oriented Development Initiative, which advances equitable land use, transit, and economic development policies in our gateway cities. Tracy's also an expert in business and labor markets and was a small business owner herself once upon a time. Her most recent work examines the impacts of uneven growth and investment across Massachusetts and provides a framework for how gateway city leaders and state officials can rethink their development tools and practices to address the deep inequities in our gateway cities. Tracy, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Juana. And I want to say also thank you very much to Steve, Dominic, and Secretary Keneally for all of your great comments. I know that there's a lot of data and a lot of information that we need to discuss here today, so I'm going to try to keep my comments short, but I have some ideas and some recommendations. First, I want to say that I'm going to focus in on gateway cities, but interestingly enough, in the polling data, 27% of the respondents were from gateway cities, which correlates with the population statistics here in Massachusetts. Although businesses in our gateway cities tend to be smaller and Latin-owned. With a little distinction between the statewide and gateway city findings from the poll, I think pretty much all of what Steve said really applies to our gateway city businesses. It's worth pointing out that as we try to rebuild our gateway cities as regional hubs, these impacts are going to be tremendous for their entire regions. Steve pointed out the disproportionate impacts on businesses that make up the main streets in our TOD and downtowns. Overwhelmingly, our TOD areas and our gateway city downtowns do comprise of some of those high-risk businesses. It calls to mind the need for a greater diversity in the types of small businesses that we have in our downtown areas, as well as the need for our small businesses to have diverse sets of services and products that they can actually leverage when pandemics and other shocks like this hit. We want to make sure that they're able to be more resilient and shift over to more services that they can provide either online or via mail order, providing more products that relate to their core services, or shifting to related services and products that respond to the crisis at hand. Many businesses have been working hard to do this, and we're grateful for the many organizations like the partners of this research that have been doing a great job helping many of these small businesses pivot their services and offerings. The types of challenges we see with evictions and foreclosures right now will continue and even intensify as more of these businesses close or file for bankruptcy in the future. The data show that small businesses, especially for entrepreneurs of color, that they lack access to get equity or debt financing, so they're usually starting their business with their savings, borrowing from friends and family, or mortgaging their own homes. Also, businesses that are structured as sole proprietorships, as corporations, and some partnership structures are pass-through organizations. This means that the owners are personally liable for any business liabilities and debts, unlike corporations. Many of them might be able to hold out for the next few months or even a year, but if we do not do more to get some sort of relief in the coming years, they will find themselves up against a wall trying to make their mortgage payments or face creditors seeking their personal assets. And so given the lower rates at which Black and brown people own property and their drastically lower wealth, this means that the wealth gap will widen even more, creating a chasm between the haves and have-nots, especially in cities with lower levels of income and property values, which perfectly describes our gateway cities. For women entrepreneurs of color, the effect will be even more pronounced. We've seen the higher rate at which women-owned businesses are actually trying to navigate this current pandemic. And so this has a number of upstream effects that we need to be in consideration of. All of this will lead to greater challenges for our municipalities, especially our gateway cities. They're already facing fiscal crunches because of lower local and property tax collections, as well as the cost increases for dealing with the pandemic. The declines in personal income, taxable transactions, and property values will inevitably roll up to the state level. This revenue hole will be around for years to come, and we need to be really prepared for that. But as bleak as all of this sounds, all is not lost. I've done a lot of study into Germany's dual economic system, which has an industrial sector that operates much like the US economy, focused on short-term growth and dependent on global finance and international transactions. The German industrial economy operates similar to our own, but alongside a domestic trade and crafts economy that includes hard-to-export services such as construction, healthcare service, beauty-related industries, restaurants, education, and a lot of the other high risk services that we saw in our poll. A lot of these services require manual labor and personal contact. And so this trades and crafts sector shaped Germany's apprenticeship program, for which the country is known worldwide. These microbusinesses tend to operate like a family and are less likely to see their workers as a line item or a cost center. That means that they're slower to hire and fire, and wages tend to be tied to better benefits and informal perks than you actually see in larger businesses. We have a dual system here in the US as well, but Germans were early in recognizing the kind of economic fluctuations and shocks that aggressive growth markets can bring, and created two different sets of regulations to govern the two industries, so that service-based small businesses can actually focus on being structured and operated differently than their larger industrial sector corporations. As we recommended in our equity report, regional economic development would benefit from more robust and resilient small business ecosystems that complement industrial sector cluster strategies. This means connecting small service-based businesses with technical assistance, financing, insurance, and products to operate efficiently and to be more resilient in lean times by focusing on revenue and job stability rather than aggressive growth. This allows for a diverse set of personal and business products and services to serve local and regional markets that work side by side with larger growth-focused sectors like global manufacturing, finance, biotech, and others. Moving forward, the state would be very helpful in continuing to provide support for municipalities, particularly gateway and regional cities, with funding and technical assistance so that they can craft robust economic development plans for building small business ecosystems that consist of more resilient, diverse service sector and light manufacturing businesses. And I also think that we should think about how to tie more of our micro grant programs, which I'm very excited about in the economic development bill, as well as other programs, so that they're tiered and targeted for micro businesses, women-owned businesses, and entrepreneurs of color. We can't continue to treat our small business sector as if it's a monolith. Second, state and foundation funded programs can be targeted to grants and low or no interest forgivable loans to retrofit small businesses with protective gear, customer shields, updated ventilation and filtration systems, and expanding space for retail and childcare businesses, even by activating vacant space in gateway cities. So this will help kind of fill some of that vacant commercial space that we're already seeing in our gateway cities, but it'll provide a way to kind of reactivate that space and continue the kind of activity we would like to see in downtown cores and TOD areas. Personal touch is going to be severely limited in the years to come, and high touch small businesses will need long-term support beyond the 3 to 6 month moratoriums that we're seeing today. So local financial service institutions have been doing also a great job in providing grants and loans to small businesses and nonprofit organizations, but we need more to be able to stabilize our neighborhoods and local economies. Some ideas on how to be more aggressive to help head off a deeper economic recession and greater inequality include freezes on issuing dividends to certain investors, freezes on premium increases, and automatically expanding coverage for COVID-related claims for the next few years at no additional cost, or expanding forgivable and no interest loans and grants to businesses to offset those revenue losses, expected payrolls, and also expanding financial services for co-ops and employee-owned companies. Of course, like I say, there's additional need to invest in retrofitting spaces so that we can provide more high-touch services. Another idea actually comes from a recent trip that I took with a group of stakeholders here from Massachusetts and Ireland, where we actually heard about what's happening there with their housing challenges. They're having a crisis in Ireland as well. There in Ireland, the banks actually introduced a mortgage to rent program that was designed to help stabilize their neighborhoods. The program includes transferring mortgages to rental agreements with much lower payments and paths for tenants to convert their leases back to mortgages penalty-free when the economic conditions improve. Such options as these would require rethinking some of the underwriting rules and other approaches as to how we provide capital and revenue protection for micro businesses, including also small and mid-sized businesses that make for the diverse, robust local economies and vibrant commercial areas, preferably in mixed-use districts in our cities today. So as a Commonwealth, we should also think about our taxation structure, which allows a lot of companies to pay little or no tax. We should also think about state-level incentives to target opportunity zone funds into deals that need help filling the gap between construction costs and market values in communities far from Metro Boston. In the end, if small businesses cannot thrive to create places that people want to live, these large companies will relocate to places with better amenities for retaining and attracting employees and with better infrastructure for getting workers where they need to go without congestion, pollution, and frequent system breakdowns. Despite the downturn, we must continue to invest in our region and our state. But these are just a few ideas for protecting our small businesses and small business ecosystems to weather this pandemic. If we work together, we can lead the nation in innovating ways to curtail and reverse the divide between small and large businesses in the Commonwealth. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Juana.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for presenting your points. I want to begin by opening up our conversation to the over 180 people that are tuned in and listening. We look forward to your questions and comments. And to get us started, I'd like to start off with a question myself. I think the data demonstrated, Steve, that clearly rent payments is one of the biggest challenges our businesses face. We also saw through the data that access to the PPP loans was limited when it came to businesses of color. I know that Governor Baker just extended the moratorium on residential properties till October 17th. Is there some benefit in considering the fact that, yes, PPP loans were supposed to assist with rental payments. However, we're seeing our businesses of colors didn't access those resources at the same extent as other business owners. Should Massachusetts consider some form of leniency and relief and support for micro businesses of color when it comes to rental payments? Secretary Keneally, can you get us started on that?
You're on mute, Secretary.
Yeah, so we do absolutely have to have more, as Tracy said, more targeted support for, not look at small businesses generically, but look at where the support needs to be targeted. If you look at it in our bill, in the loans to the CDFIs and the micro business grants, we do talk about targeting this for low and moderate income entrepreneurs and for businesses owned by women, veterans, minorities, or immigrants. So that's an absolutely core part of our strategy and a core part of the focus of the bill. Recognizing that a lot of those companies were left out of the PPP. And so how can we, again, look at where the gaps might have been in the federal programs and come up with more targeted state support? So I couldn't agree with Tracy more. We have to have a targeted effort in that regard.
Thank you. Tracy, anything to add to that?
No, I think the secretary, he said it all. It's just we need to be very intentional about how we kind of direct some of our support, because if we know where the greatest need is, that's where the focus of our support should really be. We are finding that, there are a lot of companies that have better infrastructure, they have better record keeping, they just have more staff and outside firms to help them be able to kind of better apply for a lot of these programs. I think that if anything else that, we could do to kind of make this whole process easier is just make the process simpler. I also think about, like, when it comes to unemployment here in the state, I know that we do have a work share program, I think, on the books. It would be great if that were the default option as opposed to something that people had to opt into, or even employers had to opt into, to kind of help protect people in their jobs so they can keep their benefits. I mean, so there are a lot of different things that we could work with, but I think making the administration, the paperwork, the bureaucracy a little bit easier for a lot of our businesses will help the smaller businesses. Because if you're, I know from being a solo person running a business, I had a staff of up to 15 at one point, but whenever you're kind of the person kind of making all the decisions, I mean, it's a lot of paperwork and there are only so many hours in a day. And so we want to make sure that we kind of ease that process for folks.
Yeah, I agree with that. And can I jump in for one second?
I'm done. Yeah.
Your comment about larger companies having more of a support system around them is absolutely true. And I really applaud the work of our CDCs and our CDFIs. And if we can get more capital through that channel and they continue to provide technical assistance and have real relationships with these companies, we hope that's one way we can help fill that gap.
Yeah, Secretary, and just to add to that, I think one of the strong provisions of the Economic Development Bill that speaks to providing some relief to the bureaucracy that some of our small businesses face is the TDI fellows. I think it provides an opportunity to really be flexible and getting them to be responsive in light of what this data shows with the technical assistance, with grant processes. And so I think that's a provision within the bill that is important as we continue to move forward towards recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And now we have a question from Alberto Calvo. He states the following: great study. Has a study been done on the impact to gateway cities' economies, where businesses like beauty, retail, and restaurants are most prevalent? I have markets in Chelsea and Lynn, and the impact is visible. Some storefronts are closed on Broadway, Chelsea, but quantitative data is sorely lacking. Tracy, do you want to get us started with this question?
Yes, I have to say that we're trying to gather as much information as we can. We're currently conducting a study just kind of looking at the opportunities for alternatives for commercial development in our gateway cities. And I agree that, yeah, the quantitative data just isn't there. And also, I want to make it very clear that also the qualitative data and also getting people's lived experiences are also very important, because not everything can be captured in numbers. But when looking at the quantitative data, we don't have, standardized reporting requirements or ways to easily access data from like the Department of Revenue or the Secretary of State here in Massachusetts, so it can be able to kind of see what's going on with our businesses and what types of businesses we have in our gateway cities. I know a lot of the data collection that we tend to see, it tends to be focused on Boston Metro, but the further we get away from downtown Boston, the less information that we have. And so if there's some way that our partners can help us kind of collect some of that data, or we can get some support for the CDCs, CDFIs, other organizations to kind of help start collecting that data, or make that data available through some of our state agencies, that would be tremendously helpful and kind of helping to assess kind of what more we could be doing, or what more, what other areas we need to be targeting in order to kind of support our small businesses across the state.
Makes perfect sense. And Secretary Keneally, I think you were mentioning previously that you guys have been working very closely with your Gateway City partners on making sure that, whatever policy recommendations we're recommending is informed by what's going on the ground. So I think that, continuing to hone in on the needs of our urban centers is critically important.
Absolutely. A lot of our programs, our capital programs, are run as grant programs. And so when we put the program out for RFP, we get so much great feedback back from our communities. And so that's one way we keep tabs on what's happening on the ground. And it's one way for people to communicate to us what they see the needs to be.
Thank you, Secretary. We now have a second question, and this is from Betty Francisco. And I would not be doing justice if I did not mention that she was a leader in this initiative and organizing, galvanizing all of these organizations behind this initiative. And her question is the following. Today, Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin said the Republican coronavirus relief plan will extend enhanced unemployment insurance based on approximately 70% wage replacement. Can you comment on that for employees paid at a minimum wage in this for employees paid at minimum wage? This is deepening poverty levels. Anyone want to get started on that?
I haven't seen it, so I'll have to take a look at it.
Yeah, I know that I haven't seen it either, but we have long known that, folks who are living at minimum wage levels in most communities across this country can't afford basic things like rent and groceries. This is not a phenomenon, like I say, again, looking back to Germany, they found that even with a basic minimum income levels that are guaranteed there by the Constitution, that even then it still didn't cover enough. And so they found that, even people who are working and are considered employed, that the amount of social services, as unemployment levels hit as low as 4%, people were increasingly relying upon social services. And so I think that, we need to be really thinking about wage levels as well as the costs. And we know that, Massachusetts is not an inexpensive place to live. And so we need to really kind of think about, ways that we kind of match up some of the benefits with what the actual costs are for what people have to shell out. We do know that in our gateway cities, some of those basic costs tend to be a lot higher. Those who are rent burdened or are housing burdened tend to be well over 30, if not 50%, as well as the cost of car ownership usually tops 25%, which is 10% more than what is recommended by the Center for Neighborhood Technologies. And so, those just the high costs alone are just bad. And so, yeah, I think that, the unemployment will help some, but we still need to be thinking about supplementary components to kind of help people get to a place where they can actually survive.
Absolutely. We know cost of living has only increased. And I think you mentioned that in all of your points, but we haven't seen wages increase at the same level. So clearly,
not since the 70s, yeah.
Clearly, there's work that could be done on that front. Our next question is from Adam Gibbons. What did the data illustrate regarding seasonal businesses, especially on the Cape and in Western Mass? Steve, can you speak to the geographic reach of the poll?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was fully statewide, and we checked it, checked to be sure that the statewide, the balance geographically reflected the balance of the small business community, which it does. In terms of seasonality, I think it reflects what was going on at the exact moment that it was taken. You know, I mean, the cliche, of course, is that polls are a snapshot in time, but I think it's never been more true than it is right now. You know, we know how seasonal businesses were affected as of mid-June to early July. But if you take this poll again in September, you'll see something completely different, I would think, or some things where specific businesses have had different experiences. You'll see, for instance, childcare businesses and education-oriented businesses could potentially have been seriously impacted. Hospitality and hotel kinds of businesses, of course, would potentially see effects in a couple different ways. So we've done, I think we're on our 5th or 6th of these where we're looking at the impacts of COVID on different parts of the policy world and the everyday life of people in Massachusetts. And the thing that I think I'm continually struck by is how specific each moment in time is and how much things are going to change, even in the next few weeks, thinking of education, even in the next few months, thinking of hospitality. So certainly something that we would like to keep an eye on. But in terms of geography, yes, covered the entire state.
Thank you, Steve. Our next question is from Carlos Espinosa Toro. And Secretary, I think this is a question that you could tackle for us. Since there is a clear distinction between micro businesses and bigger businesses, is there a case for the state to design loans and grants on different tiers so that we can avoid bigger businesses taking away resources that should go to micro businesses?
Well, yeah, there is. And it's really exactly what we're trying to get after in this bill, where we have the micro grant program of $15 million and then the $35 million for the CDFIs. But it's very specific about trying to address the small companies, in particular, as I mentioned, small companies run by immigrants, women, minorities, and veterans. So we are going to be, it's all in the language of these programs, and the language is very clear about the types of companies we're trying to serve.
Thank you, thank you. And another question, and this question is from Betsy Cohen, and it's for the Secretary. Has the Massachusetts Work Share program been able to address some of the issues with low wage workers receiving more on unemployment than they would working full time? Have employers used it to bring employees back part-time while continuing to receive unemployment benefits for the remainder of the hours? It certainly is not the solution to the low wage employment, but could it be a short-term solution to addressing the financial needs of key workers while allowing businesses to bring back employees?
Yeah, I think it could be. Our colleagues in Labor and Workforce run that program, and they were very active, promoted it early on in the pandemic. I don't know what the results are. We can get back to you on that one, but I know they view that as a core key tool in their toolbox. So we can get back with what we think the results have been on that one.
Thank you, thank you. Another question, and we're going to try to get to 1 or 2 more questions and then wrap it up because we are coming up to our time. And this question is from Nick Schomburger. How many of those industry-specific reopening strategy conversations and policy decisions are happening at the state level with those businesses making less than 100K in revenue?
Well, I can tell you the process we went through to develop the strategy. So we engaged with 75 different business groups, community coalitions, and labor groups. They represent 112,000 companies, about 2 million employees. We had a number of organizations come present to us that do represent small businesses. And so I think we got a good representation through our various conversations that way. But it was a very comprehensive effort to try to get at what were the businesses that would be impacted and getting their take on what a safe reopening might look like. We got great input from BECMA, the Latino Chamber of Commerce, a variety of other groups. So we definitely made an attempt to speak to a very wide variety of industry sectors and type and size of company. I will say one of the 2 of the key pieces of feedback we heard, in particular from smaller companies, was one, can you create communications tools they can use in the workplace to communicate how they're working within the new safety standards and really make it very clear, very clear checklists and templates and communications pieces, and we did that. And the other was around the need to procure new supplies to make sure the workplace is safe. And we stood up an online portal on our reopening website to provide access to suppliers of sanitizing supplies and masks and gowns and face shields. So we tried to be responsive to the needs of small companies, and we got a lot of great feedback in the process.
That's great to hear. Another question here, and Secretary, it's a question for you again. You mentioned traveling through the state, getting feedback from businesses in cities and towns. Now more than ever, that feedback process is needed since we're living through an economic crisis. Would you consider forming a standing group consisting of business associations, business owners, and other stakeholders in gateway cities?
You know, we would. I mentioned that the travel, as I mentioned before, were in the context of coming up with the new economic development plan, and every new term of a governor requires a new plan. So we did in 2019, largely what we did in 2015, which is organize sort of large regional sessions around the state to get feedback, as well as some smaller sessions. And we always are trying to get feedback along the way. I mentioned the standing weekly calls we have with chambers of commerce. I used to spend a lot of my time traveling the state, which I frankly miss doing. That was more than half my time was getting out in the communities. I haven't done that in a little while now. But no, if there's other ways we should think about getting timely feedback, we're absolutely open to that, particularly where I can't get out much and do a lot of events and meet people in person. So we should talk about that one.
Thank you, Secretary. And I think this will be our last question, and it's from Karen Kelleher. It's increasingly clear from our direct work helping small minority-owned businesses respond to this crisis that digital capacity is key to surviving, making the business safe, and in most cases, rebuilding lost demand. What resources are available to invest in this urgent need? And do we have tech innovators in our market that can partner with our small business support sector to tackle this need at scale?
I can jump in on that one. So I know early on in the administration, we saw the need to serve towns that were unserved by broadband. So we've had an effort now for the last 5.5 years to provide a solution for the 53 communities, mostly in Western Mass, that had no broadband access. And that, I think it was 2 weeks ago, the last community, we figured out a strategy for them. So we're on a good path on that one. We also had an effort early on to stand up Wi-Fi hotspots around the state in areas where we saw some gaps in coverage. But Karen brings up a great point. That's something we got to, I think, take a closer look at as we go here, and that there's more people working remotely. And we should always assess, do we have the right capital, have the right programs there? We do have some money in the economic development bill to invest in the middle mile part of the network. That's sort of essential network capacity we have to keep maintaining. So very mindful of that one. And I think as we go, we got to figure out where the gaps might be and how to fill them.
Thank you, Secretary. Tracy, is this something that you could weigh in on as well as a former small business owner? What could we be doing to ensure that the technical assistance and the digital marketing needs of small businesses and micro businesses are met?
Yeah, I think the first, as the Secretary pointed out, kind of addressing a lot of the capacity and infrastructure needs that are there. But also I think that there will be a greater need for technical assistance with training folks on how to use that technology once it is available. Just to, anyone who's been on a Zoom call, and everyone kind of figuring out whether they're muted or not, and, trying to, just even something as simple as that can make a huge difference in how an organization operates and what the options and opportunities are for a business to operate and thrive. And as we kind of come back again to those high touch businesses, I think, providing some technical assistance and support to kind of help them think creatively as to how they can kind of retool those their businesses. I know that LISC, which Karen is the head of here in Boston, they're working on a program to actually kind of provide very specific services to kind of to help businesses translate what they do into a kind of a digital platform. But, I think that we need to have a little bit more of that. LISC can't do it on their own. We need other organizations out there kind of providing that leverage of service.
Thank you. And that is our time this afternoon. Many thanks again to our sponsors, and thank you to our wonderful guests, Secretary Mike Keneally, Dominic Gaiano, Tracy Corley, and Steve Gazella. We appreciate all of you in the audience for joining us and for submitting your questions. If you enjoyed this, please stay tuned for some final upcoming forums in our series probing new public opinion data for an informed response. We will be back in your inbox soon with details on that. Until then, thank you all for tuning in and be well.
Thanks. Thank you.